Kitty's upstairs napping, so he won't be a menace to the video, as he usually decides that this is the time he wants to come in and beg for attention. So he's upstairs taking a nap, which works out great. So let's go ahead and start. All right. My Roommate is a Vampire by Jenna Levine. This is a really straightforward book, not a lot to discuss because the title really does a good job of telling you exactly what this book is about. A young woman is looking for a cheap apartment and she can't believe the deal that she finds on this roommate situation. However, it is so incredibly cheap that she's sure that there must be something wrong with it. The person asking for a roommate is a bit different. He speaks and writes incredibly formally. He really hates emails. He prefers handwritten letters, and he's not available during the day. So they end up communicating via letters that are left on, I think, like a counter in the common room. And the rest of the story is quite of a feel-good story in how she learns the truth about her roommate. And I definitely recommend this book if you just want a feel-good book. It is predictable, of course, but it is still just an all-around feel-good book that is also not too spicy. And I'm even surprised by this myself, but I would even reread this book, and I don't say that very often about these kinds of feel-good romance stories. And so that's really saying a lot. I wouldn't say that I would give it a 5-star, but I would definitely probably give it about a 4-star. All right, the next one is The Book of Air and Shadows by Michael Greber, and this has a very complex plot line. It involves a lot of characters, including a rare book dealer. There's a couple of employees that discover this priceless treasure regarding William Shakespeare's hidden writings, and an intellectual property attorney, and what some people would do in order to get this rare treasure. I found this book to be mostly very interesting, very smart and clever. I really loved the legal side of this story in terms of who would have the right to sell this hidden treasure, and the factors that go into how they make those decisions. For instance, one of those factors, kind of from the beginning of the book, was if you're in the UK, the decision is actually up to the crown, or the rights first go to the crown. And I thought that was really interesting. But in the United States, things are different. But there's a ton of conversations regarding this intellectual property. And I personally love that because I was actually really surprised when I took all of my legal courses. I was really surprised by how much I absolutely loved my property law class. And property law is really encompassing of so many different types of property, including intellectual property. We talked mostly about like land property. But anyways, super fascinating to me. But despite all of that, the overall experience of reading this book wasn't great. I felt that sometimes it was a little confusing because, not necessarily confusing, but there was a part in this story where it became confusing, and it all sorted itself out eventually, but we are kind of jumping from different perspectives. The strongest character perspectives for me were when we first started in the bookshop with this book dealer and his employees. One of the employees, you get the feeling, is fairly new. This other employee has been working for this guy for a really long time, and she kind of has a side hustle if there are ever damaged books. And so we're kind of learning that practice is a little on the shady side. And then we are introduced to the attorney who is speaking to somebody who is selling this document. And then we kind of backtrack to where this document came from. Is that right? And so we're kind of having to take these 2 points and connect them through another story. Not like a story, but so that's where the complexity comes in, which is kind of okay, but I did feel at first it was kind of confusing until we kind of came full circle, and it was like, oh, I see how that happened, because you have this document and you don't know how it went from being in possession of these one people who are looking to sell it to somebody completely new who is now trying to look into the legal ramifications of selling this document. And you're like, wait, how did it transfer hands? So something big happened and the stakes become higher, and you find out there's all these other people who are now after this document. So I could see that it's a little bit more thrilling, but it didn't feel that thrilling when you're reading it. In fact, we spend a huge portion of this book in the attorney's perspective, and he was just the most insufferable guy. But I also see that because of his personality, that he made this choice that kind of ties into the main plot of trying to track down this document, who it belongs to, who's out to get it, how it transfers hands. What is that movie? You know what? Now that I'm kind of recalling it, it kind of reminds me of that movie with Nicolas Cage where he's like a treasure hunter. Do you know what I mean? If I think about it, I'll put it up here. I was very put out by the attorney character because we had to kind of discover a lot of these things through this character. Therefore, we had this look into his personal lifestyle, and we had to suffer through his unrelenting sexual fantasies and escapades. And at the time, I didn't see how any of that really added to the plot very much, or why this character was the main focus. But I think that every time I think about the story, I think about how I explain this story, I can see why. I can see it now, retrospectively, why maybe the author chose to tell the story through him, because if it wasn't for the way that he is, we might not have had a thing happen in the story. But I still do think that the author maybe could have chosen a different perspective, or even a multiple perspectives way to tell the story through in order to make it more interesting and engaging for a wider range of readers, because I feel like there's a lot of readers like me who get very put off by characters who see women through that lens. You know what I'm saying? Like, they objectify women constantly throughout their entire narrative, and it also felt incredibly unbalanced. Like, I really wanted more of the book dealer and more of these characters who first found the document, and then there is another small section where you have these random characters introduced, and they're not super random. They feel kind of random because, like, you don't get to know them at all. And I kind of wanted to know a little bit more about the woman who had that side hustle from the beginning, and we didn't get enough of her. And I thought their character perspectives were a lot more interesting than this attorney. This attorney was just gross. And I understand that there are people like that, and he does offer an interesting perspective overall, mostly because of the dynamic of, like, oh, you're that kind of guy, so of course you wouldn't question what this woman is asking you to do, because you'll do anything for some tail. Anyways, I think I'm done talking about this book. This was a book that was part of a Read It or Unhaul It challenge. I will try to remember to link it up here or in the description box below. That being said, I don't think I will reread this book. I'm glad that I read it, and I'm going to unhaul it. The next book I read was Paranormalcy by Kristen White, and this is a young adult fantasy. This is set in a magical world where all kinds of magical creatures exist. We follow the daughter of this underground society of supernatural hunters, and she's not a biological daughter, but she was basically raised by this woman who runs this kind of like a task force for supernaturals. You know what I'm saying? They capture supernaturals and do things like help them integrate or help them through things, or lock them up if they're too dangerous to society. This girl, her name is Nora, by the way. Is it Nora? Evie, my bad. Evie. Only Evie is one of the few humans, and she lives this really sheltered life. She finds out that a lot of truths have been withheld from her, and she feels pretty lonely as there's not really anyone her age, and all of her friends are supernaturals, which there's still always going to be kind of like a barrier there. However, everything changes for her when they capture a mysterious boy who's the only one her age, and it also doesn't hurt that he's also pretty cute. He manages to drop a bombshell of truth on her that upends her life as she knows it. This is the first in the series, and I do plan on continuing this. I did really enjoy this. Now, Evie, when you're introduced to her, she is supposedly human. However, she does have a special gift that allows her to see through glamours. Also, the vampires in this are kind of glamored, I guess. There's a fairy guy that she kind of fell for and she's tied to in some way, and he can kind of just drop in on her whenever, and she really doesn't like this guy. She's almost a little bit of afraid of what he could do. The task force also uses fairies to jump around the world because fairies can like open these doors anywhere, so they can quickly get to a certain location to do their job. I thought that that was really interesting. However, I guess that's all I have to say about this. I don't want to spoil too much of it. I know it's not like the greatest written book. I just really enjoyed this book. The next one is The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. All that I knew going into this book was that it was based off of a Russian fairy tale. What I didn't realize is what a sweeping tale this is. I usually always think that sweeping is such a weird way to describe stories, but I think that after reading this book, this definitely feels like the correct adjective to use for this story. This is set in a bitter, cold place where there's long, harsh winters. Vasilisa grows up with tales of a demon called Frost. This is also about a family, Vasilisa's family, who honors the spirits and gives them offerings to keep up goodwill and all that good stuff. However, after Vasilisa's mother passes away and her father realizes after a time that he really probably needs to remarry to help with the home and the children, his new wife forbids them to practice their rituals of offerings to the spirits. Vasilisa knows that this is a really bad idea. It begins to show when the crops begin to die and other terrible things begin to happen. This was a really beautiful book, and I think that it deserves a reread. I did listen to this on audiobook, but I think that I would love to read the physical book of this because I think that it just demands a little bit more of my attention than I could give it while multitasking listening to the audiobook. And I will absolutely be finishing this series sometime or another. The next book I read was A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle L. Jensen. I read this over Valentine's Day weekend. I really had in mind that I was going to do like a romance themed vlog for Valentine's Day, but it never came to fruition. I started it, but I think I was actually really sick that weekend. And I didn't read as much as I wanted to, and it just didn't come out like I anticipated. Regardless, though, I did read this book and picked it up because of the fact that it is a romantasy. This book is inspired by Norse mythology, where following a woman who is married to this really cruel man, and she's been harboring a secret. Push comes to shove, and she reveals the secret, and her life ends up taking this really big turn. I really am trying to hold back from revealing what actually happens next because it is a huge part of this romantic dynamic that just leaves your jaw dropped. Like, I was like, I cannot believe that that just happened. This does also include a forbidden love, which I am kind of a sucker for forbidden love stories. It's also very dramatic and juicy, and it built up really well. There's angst and longing and lust that just makes you feel all of the feels. And by the time the explicit sexy scenes come up, as you know, I really don't like books that have very explicit scenes. But I knew that going into this book, there was going to be those kinds of scenes. So I was kind of already prepared for it. And I do have to give it to this book that by the time we got there, they had built it up so much that it was kind of that it was well done in that way. However, once the couple decided they were gonna go there, it's like all they wanted to do. It really falls into that trap that so many other romantasy books fall into that I just cannot get on board with. And the last portion of this book, the scenes became so incredibly tedious There was the longest written sex scene ever. It just like never would end. That I forgot what the plot was even about. I get that they can't keep their hands off of each other, but it just ended on such a poor note for me. This tends to be a common consensus that I have heard from other readers of this book, but I was glad to know it for myself. I do hear a lot of other people talking about her other series called The Bridge Kingdom, and I've not given up on this author yet. I still do want to give that one a try. I do have to give this book credit that minus the pornographic scenes in the end, this book was a solid book. I enjoyed the writing style mostly. But again, just the explicit pornographic sex scenes at the end, like, just no. That being said, I will be unhauling this book. The next book I read was The Otherwhere Post by Emily J. Taylor. This book was absolutely incredible. I loved it. This is 5 stars for me. This was sent to me by the publisher, and I want to say it's St. Martin's Press. This author also wrote Hotel Magnifique, which I have not read yet, but I most definitely will be prioritizing that book. I've heard that's an incredible book, and if it's anything like this, I'm gonna love it. This follows Maeve, who lives in a Victorianish sort of London where magic is real in the form of scriptomancers. They have the ability to scribe magical letters. Now that I'm kind of thinking about it, it kind of reminds me of in Harry Potter when parents can send their kids letters to the school that like, what is that scene? I'll try to look it up and find it in here, but it's not exactly in that form, but it can be, I think. Scriptomancers work at the Otherwhere Post, and these scribes have all sorts of interesting abilities. Like, for instance, a traveling scribe helps post workers travel to different places. Tracking scribes can help you track down a person as long as you have their name. And I don't think that this is a spoiler because it is revealed early on. Maeve is the daughter of Jonathan Abernathy, who's known as a criminal, a murderer. Maeve had always believed what everyone else said until she gets this letter that says her father was innocent. So she is determined to learn more and find the sender of this letter. She wants to clear her father's name and in turn also clear her own name because she has lived in fear of telling people her name because of her father's reputation. And I really don't want to tell you any more because it's all so good. You have to find out for yourself. This book is a 5-star read for me. As I said, I loved this. There is a bit of a romance in here, and I feel that it is done so well. I don't even feel like it fully fits into any specific romantic trope, which is so refreshing. It's slow burn, it's sweet, but it's like the product of the plot. And the plot is 100% the focus, which is a very refreshing balance there as well. I also have to mention that the scriptomancy itself is really interesting magic system. I really also, again, don't want to spoil the specifics. I literally have to keep reminding myself to bite my tongue and not give it away. But scriptomancy, like, I feel like when you're a big fantasy reader, there are certain types of magic systems when you've read so many books, like, okay, Paranormalcy maybe would be a really good example of this, where sometimes the magic system the magic becomes so easily attainable, like you're just born with it or something and it comes naturally to you. So I do see a lot of people, and I myself love a magic system that is difficult to learn, like any other skill. And it might be a little bit different for everyone. There might be people who are a little bit more adept at certain aspects than other people, and just a wide range. It just makes it feel a lot more natural and interesting. So scriptomancy is not an easy thing to learn. There's a lot that goes into it, like the types of quills and inks and powders. Potency is like, and it can be like a fine art. It can be like chemistry, and it really ups the stakes because it can also be very dangerous. It feels alluring and also dangerous. And I think that it's a really nice take on magic system that I really haven't seen. So definitely get your hands on this and read it if that sounds interesting to you. It's super good. The next one I read was Shadow of Night. This is the second book in the All Souls trilogy. And the first book was A Discovery of Witches. This was really good. It's so well done. In this book, we discover what Diana's gifts are, and they take us into the past, to Shakespeare's London. I can't stress enough how detailed it really is. I mean, it's really realistic for a time travel to imagine all of these little details that people of the past would pick up on that makes you really not fit in. Like, you cannot hide everything to 100% blend in. And I was just really impressed by that. It really took its time and it felt natural. This book did take me quite a long time to read, and I'm really looking forward to moving into the third book, the Book of Life. There is actually also a fourth book too. I think it's more like a novella or something called Time's Covenant. But anyways, I really enjoyed this. And then the last one to talk about is Wildwood Dancing by Juliet Marillier. I think I messed that up. I thought that I actually had read this in March because I put it with a March read it or unhaul it. But I ended up actually finishing this in the month of February, which is totally fine. This is a 12 Dancing Princesses retelling. It is kind of written for a little bit younger audience, but it is a book for everybody. And I did give away spoilers in my read it or unhaul it video. You can check it out. But I had so many feelings about this. It was a bit of a slow start, but very whimsical. I really enjoyed this book. So these girls, ever since they were little, they found a magical door in their room that takes them to this other world, and they are fully aware that you can get lost and you can get stuck there if you let yourself. So they are very conscious of making sure that they make it back in time. They can only travel to the other world on like a full moon, and as they get older, the two older girls are getting to marriageable age. The oldest daughter, you would think everything would kind of fall on her, but she's kind of like more flighty and like whimsical and a romantic and stuff like that. And Jana is a lot more practical. And one day they go over there and the older sister meets a vampire and starts to fall in love with her. Well, around this time, things in the real world are happening. Their father has to leave. There's a lot of talk about the business and getting married, and women of this time not being able to possess things for themselves. So it's like up to their father of who they get to marry. But if their father is no longer there, then it would go to their cousin. I had a lot of feelings about this, and I thought it was incredibly good. I really enjoyed this book. I would recommend this. That being said, I kept thinking, I did read this for a read it or unhaul it. Would I reread it? I don't really know. I should probably unhaul it, but I feel like this book might be talking points for the future again. I don't know, so maybe I'll keep it on my shelves for longer. I think I saw that there might be another book to follow this one. Not quite sure, but okay, well, that's the end of this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you soon. Bye.